All right, context. So when we talk about context, of course, register depends upon the situational and the cultural context that you're existing in when you're making that communication. And of course, you could maybe consider like a secondary audience as well if you're sort of recording it, filming it, uploading it, live streaming it, all those sort of things. So just as a general rule, especially in Unit 4, we're going to be able to write entire essays about a single person's identity, their idiolect, their sociolect, all those sort of things, exploring the way that all of these cultural, situational elements impact upon the person and kind of inform the way that they behave, communicate, and so much more. But this is our first consideration of it in any great detail. So it's important that we get this right, I guess. So especially within schools, there's a sense that like, you're in a class and you're all the same, hey year 12s, hey 12B, how 7R, 10K, that there's like this, sort of homogeneity, which means everything's the same. Think of homogenized milk. It's all in the same, it's all together. But for this, we have to sort of counter that view. And we also have to, as much as we can, step away from political correctness and be able to talk about different cultures, religions, and situations and how they might inform the way that we behave. This is especially true for formal language, because you might think, formal settings have very specific rules and expectations, whereas the difference between having a conversation in a restaurant and a pub, and a McDonald's aren't really that different. There's slight variations, but the difference between, giving a deposition in court or defending yourself against a charge in court versus a conversation in a McDonald's, a pub, and a restaurant. There's a massive gap there. But of course, depending on the text, situational and cultural context may still be relevant, but it's always especially relevant for a formal text because the level of formality typically matches the surroundings and vice versa. So this is from another study, not from our study design, and it's from another study. But culture is made up of these things: language, history, religion, food, and shelter, where you live, how you live, education system, security, protection, relationships, family, and others, whether you're married, single, part of a multi-family commune. These are all different things. Political and social organizations, and creative expression and recreation. So if you really looked at yourself or someone else long enough and you sort of use this as a checklist or a kind of exploratory framework, you could see how each of these things would impact the person, the way they behave, and of course their language as well. So this is from one of our textbooks. You can see, function is something we always try and come back to, and not necessarily a narrow understanding of function, but the reason that things are happening, the reason things are being done. And so the most important one for us to add is for ceremony and ritual. This will become part of the study design for formal language. We probably won't talk about anything too religious, so it might be, things a little bit more secular, as we're a public school, not a religious school. But you can see, there's the function of ceremony. And of course, we've got spoken and written here, so they're slightly different. Obituary, written prayer, wedding toast, rights given by police, so the Miranda rights, which we've talked about before. Each of these serve, a function. There's a ritualistic function to them. And it's easy to think, we live in modern times. We don't really go in for rituals, but, a 21st speech is a very distinct thing as opposed to, is there even such a thing as a 20th speech or a 22nd speech? Not really, but a 21st there is, and an 18 speech, is also a different thing as well. All right, so situational context, we use an acronym we've known since, since Unit 1, FARMS. So in the same way, you can talk about this in the introduction, though we might shift over to a cramps model. Basically, it contains the same ideas. So field or function. So if you think about where a text is happening, what are the topics or themes? What are the lexemes being discussed? That's the situational context. And also the function, why does it exist and what are they trying to achieve? So if you haven't twigged already, list down FARMS again with these sort of subsets and questions within them. And then we'll be running through a whole range of different contexts following this. for you to consider how these elements would be different across the different contexts. And then we'll look in more depth, in more detail at some, Australian texts that will be more similar of the exam. For this point, we're just going quite broad, and we're thinking of, big picture thinking, and then we'll narrow it down and get closer to the study design and the exam more specifically as we go. Audience, who's involved, who's listening, so being an active participant or an inactive participant, you're still an interlocutor within the situational context. But of course, depending on who is present and their relative power and all those sort of things, this would affect the register and the type of communication that's taking place there. So relationships, this is, a sort of a big concept, a swollen concept that has a lot of ideas within it. Social distance, solidarity. So, say people in an international airport in a crisis, it's a different level of solidarity than, people within a church or a mosque or those sort of things where there's a certain level of shared goals, experiences and values. And that, cultural context is important here. Relative power, is someone running the show, and how does that influence the way things happen within that situational context? Mode, written, spoken, signed, electronic. There's not too much to explore here, but of course, if it's written, you're expecting a bit more precision, a bit more preparation. Spoken, a lot less formal, repairs, all those sort of things that you'd expect. Signed mode, you'd be looking, if we were to look at that, you'd be looking more at body language and how that contributes to the sort of broader communication of the signed form. And electronic, that's could be a million different things depending on where and how and who. Setting, when and where was the text created, where and when and where might it be heard or read. So again, primary setting, secondary setting, all those things are important as well. Semantic field, so just to kind of explore this concept a bit more fully, because it's been an issue before, we're looking at a set of related lexical terms: claret, rosé, Riesling, wines, I assume, not really an alcohol expert, domain of sport, all sorts of different things would have a very different range of words being used. And then technically the hypernym is the top and the hyponym is the bottom, but since that requires so much sort of repetition and learning, we're going to avoid that, and we tend to use the superordinate and the hypernyms as kind of the categories because they're very distinct and similar, and dissimilar rather. You can see color: purple, crimson, violet, lavender, red, blue, green. We don't really use co-hypernyms, but semantic field is made up of these parts. So when you're exploring them, you'd be sure to use the superordinate semantic field or lexeme is color, and then the hypernyms of purple, crimson, violet, and lavender all fit within the semantic field and support the situational context of, I don't know what it would be, an art class perhaps. And then jumping across to cultural context. And what? Another acronym? You'd love one? No walkers. Here we go. VAB, values, attitudes, and beliefs. So when you're writing about cultural context, rather than just doing, it's Australian, ta-da, and we know that Australian English is, non-rhotic, it's yada, 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 yada. Now we can explore it in a lot more detail and say values, attitudes, and beliefs. So this is directly from the study design. So values, attitudes, and beliefs, VAB, is something we're going to write in the margin and explore in detail. Values, shared values and norms between the speaker, the audience, and the interlocutor. So of course those would be affected by the surrounding, the situational context as well. So all these things kind of jumble in together. But if you think, the easiest example, I guess, is if you're sitting in a church pew, you have the impression that everyone in that, in the same pew as you, the same wooden chair, has similar values. They believe in self-sacrifice, they believe in God, etc., etc. Attitudes is a bit more nuanced and specific, so the definition here is a bit broad. But if you were to then, in that same situation, lean across and nudge someone on the shoulder in the wooden church pew and say, "Gee, what do you think about, I don't know, a hot button issue of the time, smoking or homelessness or something?" You would expect that their values would inform their attitudes, but of course that wouldn't always necessarily be the case. So if the person you nudged happened to be homeless, and they might have a different attitude to homelessness or being unemployed or those sort of things, whereas you might assume a certain set of attitudes. So looking at a text in specifics, you can explore these attitudes in detail. And beliefs, same thing. Again, you're thinking situational context. Values, attitudes, and beliefs, we'll have to do some more work to sort of pull these apart and unthread them as being different. But if you just think of them all as sort of a job lot for the start, and then you can sort of pull out as they emerge within the text. So beliefs, shared beliefs between the speakers and the audience or interlocutors. You're looking for basically solidarity. So cultural context is an element that supports solidarity. Shows that you're in the in-group, you're together, you're working together. So if there's discordance or uncooperativeness within this, then you might consider their views, values, attitudes, and beliefs as different as a result. All right, so what I want you to do is for each of these, set a 1 minute timer, leave it up, pause the video in fact, look at the picture and write about 1 minute using the acronyms that we've gone through so far, so FARMS and VAB, and do a quick little exploration, maybe 30 seconds on each of what you would expect as a result of the, the cultural or situational context that you're faced with. So we'll start situational because that's easiest. So AFL Grand Final, what are you expecting this to impact situationally and culturally? What kind of language would you expect? And filling in those FARMS and the VAB for each one. For this context, what do you think you would notice? Now you're at a funeral, again, FARMS, VAB, what would you notice? What is typical, what is expected here? You're visiting a friend, mother, family, grandma, someone, they've just given birth to a baby, you're visiting them to meet their little one. FARMS, VAB, what would you expect? You're in an art gallery. You're walking around, you're having a conversation with your friend. FARMS, VAB, what would you expect? You're on a first date, a clearly staged and not real first date with amazing background. FARMS, VAB, what would you expect? Cultural context now. So again, you're doing FARMS and VAB again, but these ones I've selected especially to make it a bit juicy for your cultural context. So you're in a mosque in Deer Park. Again, FARMS, VAB. You're the patient in a doctor's surgery talking to a general practitioner. FARMS, VAB, what would you expect? You're in Footscray Market in the seafood section. Again, FARMS, VAB, what would you expect? You're at the grand opening of the Church of Scientology in Ascot Vale. There's much to do happening. FARMS, VAB, what would you expect? You're in Parliament during, a protest, sort of parliamentary protest, so not a, not the typical protest. FARMS, VAB, what would you notice? All right, you're in Royal Park, you're at an anti-vax sort of protest, you've got your sign ready. FARMS, VAB, what would you expect? So for each of these, you should have taken a quick series of notes and noted down how you're getting different expectations. Your FARMS and your VAB are hopefully quite different based upon these cultural contexts. And then the next activity we'll do exploring this will be to go into detail about specific texts that you're likely to get in an exam.